and this is Ava with her teething ring. Say hi. Hi everybody, I'm Jenna, this is Ava. We're going to try to tell the story about her tongue-lip adhesion surgery that she had at 6 weeks. So honestly, I've been putting it off a little bit because it is hard to talk about and hard to collect my thoughts about. So I'm going to do my best, and hopefully it will be clear, and I'll be able to tell this part of her story. So as I've said in previous vlogs, because of her Puro band sequence, Ava was struggling to put on weight and struggling to breathe when she was first born. And she was just tiny. So she was born at 5 pounds, 12 ounces. And she, you know, they lose the first section of weight. And so she got down to 5 pounds, 5 ounces. And it took her a full month to get back up to birth weight, which is not normal by any means, because her little body was burning so much energy trying to breathe that even though she was a fantastic eater, even though we were fortifying the food and the specialty bottle was working, she just wasn't putting on weight. And at that point, like, we were going to doctor's appointments almost every day trying to monitor it, to see what we could do to make sure that we were doing everything right. And even though we as parents, I think, did everything that we could, there was a point where she was still labeled as failure to thrive, because she wasn't growing the way she should. You want to tell the story? You want to tell the story? Sorry. So by her 1 month appointment, they had already set a surgery date for her a couple weeks later, because it's hard to schedule the surgery date because you have to coordinate with ear, nose, and throat, the plastic surgery office, and make sure that everyone is on there and ready to go. So we went into the 1 month appointment knowing that that was one of the first potential decision days, that if she wasn't up to her birth weight, she was going to have surgery. And I remember holding her and crying because I was very scared and really nervous. She goes in, she's weighed. The pediatrician literally did a dance in his office because he was so happy that she had gotten up to her birth weight. And we were relieved, we were happy. But what they told us is, because it's so difficult to schedule that date, that they wanted to keep it on the books, and that we would reevaluate like the week before when we went to our plastic surgeon's appointment at around 6 weeks. So this is hard because in hindsight, I can see why she would have been labeled failure to thrive. She looks undernourished, she looks tiny, but to me, she was my baby. That was how she looked. She was eating good, she was smiling at that point. She was just this sweet little thing. And the idea of putting her under the knife, handing her over to somebody else and trust that like everything was going to be okay, was overwhelming and scary. But as parents, you do what is best for your kid. And so we went into that appointment. We had 2 pages front and back of questions of like pros and cons of the tongue-lip adhesion. So one of the other options is mandible extraction, I think, or distraction. So a jaw distraction, where they put hardware in and turn it and bring the chin forward. But they thought that, if for Ava's case specifically, that they might be able to solve the problem with the tongue-lip adhesion. That for Ava, that might be a little less invasive. You know, and so we're asking all these pros and cons questions. And they don't know at that point if it is going to solve the problem until she is under anesthesia and they can put a camera down her throat and make sure that that would solve the problem. So we're needing to make this decision with the guidance of, you know, the doctors, but not really knowing if it was the best decision for her. And our plastic surgeon said something that I feel really lucky that they said, just that she would be okay with us choosing at that point, because she was like, you guys are so attentive to her needs. We watch you hear her obstruct and attend to her right away. If you want to wait, we will support that and let you wait, and then keep doing the daily kind of monitoring and watching her weight and meeting with you. Which I really appreciate having the choice, but at the same time, how do you make that decision? You know, not knowing for sure that that's going to solve the problem, knowing that if it doesn't, you are going to put your child through a lot of pain for something that might not work. So it was really overwhelming, but me and my husband talked and decided that, you know, there's a lot of benefits to doing it, and there are not a lot of benefits to waiting, because their chins do grow in, and so there was a possibility that if we waited and just kept moving her position anytime she obstructed, that the chin would eventually grow in, and we might get past that like trouble point. But the longer we waited, you know, the tinier she was, she couldn't lay on her back, she couldn't explore the world the way she wanted to. Like, she would sometimes look up at me because she'd hear my voice and then block her own airway and be scared and start to cry because she couldn't breathe. So like I said, we asked the questions and we decided to move forward with the surgery. The first 24 hours were the hardest for us because we still, didn't know if it was the right decision. And for us, so the first 24 hours, they were just monitoring her, right? So she's hooked up to all of the monitors to watch her heart rate, all of that. They needed to put an IV in, and because she was so tiny, she had a lot of problems with the IVs. And, you know, keep in mind at this point, she still can't lay on her back because she would obstruct her airway. So it was a lot of trying to keep her on her side and keep her still. But for us, something scary that happened was one of the IVs that went in made her whole little leg swell up with fluid. And so we went to go feed her, and she was in distress and pain, and there really wasn't anything that we could do. And they need to have an IV in it. They need to be able to administer medicine and everything. So the first thing we tried was to leave the IV the way it was to see if the swelling would go down. Next thing they tried was to turn the fluid off to see if that would go down. And finally, they ended up taking it out and re-putting it in. Well, throughout the time we were there, she ended up, there was something like 4 or 5 different attempts of placements for IVs. So her leg had already swollen up. You know, I'm overwhelmed, I'm scared. I'm still pumping at the time every couple hours, trying to hold her the best, you know, that I could. Get the cuddles in, make sure she knows that she's safe. And they had gotten the second IV in, and the time comes for her to be wheeled into the surgery room, and she must have gone on her back and then started to obstruct and got scared. So as we're moving down the hallway and I'm walking next to her, she has kicked off this other IV, so there's blood everywhere. She is upset, she's scared. And I couldn't pick her up because they were moving her. And it was a very short distance. She wasn't in like danger. She was just upset and hurting, and I couldn't do anything. We get to the, sorry. Okay. We get to the surgery room, and they have me hold her in like the fussy hold to kind of calm her down and hand her off to one of the doctors so that they can take her. And sorry. So that they can take her back into the room. And keep in mind, the doctors have done a really good job of telling us what's going to happen at this point. So we at least expect some of what's coming next. But you know, we have to go into the waiting room, and we know that they're going to stick the camera down her throat and see if that's going to solve the problem. But at that point, it's been a long, like, overnight, right? Like, it's been a little traumatic watching her hurting, and we hadn't even started the surgery yet. So she is in the back. They check with the camera, and the ear, nose, and throat doctor comes out into the waiting room and says that we have made the right decision and that they think that this is going to solve the problem. And I think me and my husband both just felt this huge weight lifted off our shoulders, because we didn't know if it was the right choice for her. And they could have come out and told us that you know, we needed to do the mandible distraction instead. But for Ava, again, the tongue-lip adhesion was going to be the correct one. Now, tongue-lip adhesion is kind of what it sounds like, where they sew the bottom of the tongue to the inside of the lower lip. And what that does is that keeps the tongue forward so it stops obstructing her airway. However, because there are stitches in the mouth and she's an infant, they have to keep her sedated then for about 6 days, where she's just out. And that gives the stitches time to heal. That lowers the risk of her moving her tongue and ripping them out, like from crying or feeding or whatever. Because she is sedated, and they don't want to alarm her, they don't recommend that anyone really other than nurses touch the baby during that time period. You know, as parents, there were nice nurses that occasionally we would get to put like a hand on her while they were changing her diaper and needing to touch her anyway. But to go 6 days without holding your baby was really hard. I know, and you were so brave. So she came out of surgery, did really good in surgery. Her mouth and lip, you know, looked really swollen. There was a sign hanging up above the bed that said critical airway, because they didn't, you know, want it to obstruct. She had the breathing tube in. She was attached to all these machines and all these monitors, and they had to let her heal. And so you do what you yeah, you do what you can in that situation. So we slept at the hospital. You get into your own routine. So Dan had to go to work, or would sometimes bring his computer to the hospital to do some work from there. But I would get up, I would try to make sure I was present for the doctor's round so I could hear the latest updates. I was at her side when they had to switch the IVs, because again, we had more issues with the IVs. At one point they had to do like a paralytic to try to get the IV in her. So that was also really hard, like watching your baby not responding and completely still was hard to watch. I, however, am really interested in medical stuff, so because I trusted the doctors, the nurses, there was a part of me that found it very fascinating. to watch what they were doing. They would take x-rays to make sure that the feeding tube and the breathing tubes were all aligned the way they were supposed to be. I would read her stories. I would sing to her. I would just make sure that she knew that I was nearby. And I don't know how much she heard, but it made me feel better to be able to do stuff. I passed the time by doing silly things, like I worked on a Shutterfly book, like maternity book, just again to pass the time, because 6 days is both short and long at the same time. So she was doing really good. We got to a point where we were given the okay for her to come off of the breathing machines. And after they took Ava's breathing tube out and we could hold her for the first time in 6 days, it was one of the most emotional things I think I've ever gone through. I was so happy. I was crying, just tears of joy. I was so happy to hold her again. 6 days is a long time. And to hold her, to look in at her little face, to try feeding her again, to know that she was okay and that she was gonna be okay. It was a very, very special thing. I obviously still get really emotional. I don't know how moms do it for longer. I really don't. It was, I don't know how to explain what it's like to watch your baby attached to all those monitors and tubes, and knowing that she is potentially hurting and not being able to do anything. The moments where I got to touch my baby in that week were very special to me. You know, it was like night and day when she was off that breathing machine, and then they started to take her off this sedation because she could lay on her back. So we had to stay another 5 days because they had to wean her off of the sedation because the drug she was on was so intense. And there was a point where she was having withdrawal symptoms, which was also really scary. Things like her body would shake or her eyes would shake. And as a mom, you know those things aren't right, you know, like, but you know, they would adjust the meds as needed and kind of just keep looking at the levels. We had some fantastic nurses to really make sure that she was as comfortable as possible. And the other funny thing that happened was, so during the surgery, they put a surgical button here. Yeah. A surgical button at the bottom of the chin here to anchor the tongue down. Well, Ava loves, and still does, like having her hands by her face. And so she was not happy at being restricted and not being able to have her hand up there because it was soothing to her. And so finally, one of the days we went to go have dinner at the hospital cafeteria, we come back upstairs and I'm walking down the hallway and I recognize Ava's blanket down the hallway, and I hear my baby crying, and you know your babies cry, and the nurses were kind of, she was still attached to like the rolling monitor things and the drugs that she was still on, but they were going for a walk to help soothe her because she had loosened the surgical button from her face. Now the plastic surgeon came, checked it out. They're like, you know, normally we leave this in a little longer, but she is clearly opinionated, is ready for it to come out, and I feel okay having it come out right now. So that was pretty, a pretty funny example of how Ava had very strong opinions early on, even throughout the whole process. Other things that the nurses did that were so fantastic. They would give her baths, and then they'd ask one if I had any hair bows for her, and so then they'd put like a bow on her hair so she kind of looked more like herself. They would wrap her up in blankets from home. They gave us these beautiful quilts that volunteers had made to kind of make the hospital bed look more homey than just the hospital sheets. And I can't speak highly enough about the staff at the hospital that we were at. It just made it for a much easier experience. And so me and Dan did take one night each to sleep at home, but otherwise we're sleeping in the hospital bed. Something we did, I don't know if other people would find this helpful, is we brought one of those eggshell foam pads that you put on top of mattresses, and we put that on top of the hospital pull-out thing, and that did help us sleep. Towards the end also, so she's able to lie on her back now, which was amazing. Like, I can't even really explain what kind of a game changer and world completely changing thing it was for that. We have just really special pictures from that time period where it just looks like a parent holding a child, and it doesn't look abnormal. It looks like a parent holding a child, but it is my child who is laying on her back, and that to me was incredible. The nurses brought like a vibrating bouncer, and they brought like a mobile and a mirror for her to look at, and that mobile she just watched over it and over it and was so fascinated with it. And like, she still to this day really likes mobiles, and I don't know if that's just a baby thing or if that's a extra special thing for Ava, but like I don't think I will ever take for granted seeing a baby lay on their back ever again. So obviously it was a really difficult experience, but the progress that Ava has made since then, so her weight gain, like she immediately started putting on more weight, like immediately after that surgery, because she wasn't struggling anymore, she wasn't fighting anymore. The ability for her to learn to move freely without worrying about obstructing or breathing, to be able to explore her world, it has been life-changing. And the next surgery in a couple weeks is going to be to remove the tongue-lip adhesion. And I'm going to talk in a later vlog a little bit more about that, and then how we are preparing and if we are ready or not for that next surgery. But I did want to share the story about her tongue-lip adhesion, and just kind of tell moms that are going through hospital stuff that you are warriors. It is not easy. It is very difficult, and I tip my hat to all the parents who have to do that. You are incredible, and your children are so lucky to have you. See, even Ava's applauding you. Good job. Thank you guys for listening. I know this is a little long, but I will talk to you later.